I wanted to make this video to show others who are considering or actually performing an LS swap into an 88 to 98 Chevy truck some information that's detailed that I was not able to find in any book, magazine, video, or website. This primarily concerns the wiring. First of all, let me give you this disclaimer. I'm not a professional mechanic. I'm showing you what I did to my 1995 Chevy truck to install a 2002 Chevy Tahoe 5.3 4L60E transmission in place of the existing 4.3 V6 4L60E automatic transmission. I'll show you what I did to make all my factory gauges and lights function properly. Your results may vary. You may not have the exact combination as mine, but this may be able to help guide you into the right direction. Now note, once you begin messing with the wiring of your truck or your vehicle, if you need professional assistance, many mechanic shops will not try to figure out your particular problem. They don't want to mess with a can of worms that you may have created. A specialty shop may be able to help, but you can expect to pay $80 to $120 an hour for that help. Having said that, don't let it psych you out. If I can do it, you can do it. Let's get started. On my project, I waited till the last minute to do the wiring, frankly because I was very intimidated by it. I've been messing with cars as a hobby for over 40 years, but this project was way more involved than anything I've taken on in the past. I decided that since this was my first LS swap, I wanted to have my existing wiring harness professionally modified. I figured when I got it all together, there'd be a lot of reasons why the truck may not run, but if I had the harness professionally modified, I could at least take that out of the equation. When I got the harness back, it was pretty easy to hook up all the sensors. The problem was the 7 wires that I would have to hook up or marry into my existing truck harness. I wanted all my original dash gauges and lights to work. We're going to take a look at the 7 wires that required attachment and the other things that had to be done in order to make everything function. To begin with though, before you ever start, do research. Search the internet for websites, blogs, or videos for all the information you can about your particular swap. 2 good sites I found that were helpful was ls1truck.com and lt1swap.com for wiring harness information. That's a really good place to go. Now, schematics for your truck and donor vehicle are a must, especially for your vehicle. Where to get it? I tell you what, let me go inside and get the computer and I'll show you exactly how to get it. Okay, I'm going to show you where to find some excellent schematics for your 88 to 98 Chevrolet truck. On Google, go to AutoZone. From their website, when you click onto it, at the very top where it says My Vehicles, up here at the top, I currently show there's a Jeep Liberty. Click the arrow here to show other vehicles. Now I've already added the 2002 Chevy Tahoe, which was my donor vehicle, and I've got my 95 Chevy truck that shows the truck I'm swapping into. If you don't have your vehicles in there, add it to the list. Once you do, select the truck you want the vehicle that you want the wiring guide for and click on it. In this case, the 95 Chevy truck. And when it comes up, go over to the right where it says Repair Help. Hover over it and select Vehicle Repair Guides. Then the next page that comes up, in the very center, you'll see Chassis Electrical. Select that. Scroll up just a bit and over to your left, there's a wiring diagrams option. Select that. And presto, there you have a variety of schematics. It starts off with an index of wiring diagrams, how to read them, how to interpret them. As you continue to scroll down, they've got a bunch. 91 to 98 truck wiring schematic, 94 model with a 4.3 and 7.4 liter manual transmission. There's a bunch. I believe number 19 was mine. The 1995 GM truck 4.3, 5.0, 5.7, and 7.4 with automatic transmission schematic. Click Enlarge. Now there's a nice diagram, but it's within a frame that's too small. So if you'll right click in the center of the page and select View Image, that brings it up where you can see the whole thing. Now it's a little small. In the upper right hand corner, I want to hit Print. And from the print page, it makes a nice size where I can see it. I've selected the scale to be 150% because that fills the page. It shows it to be 2 pages, which actually it's 1 page. You've got this information on the lower page. You don't want that. So from this, select Print and page 1 of 1. And that will print that page. You might want to print several because I marked all mine up and they're a great resource. And for reference, here's our printed page. You get close, you can see the level of detail. This shows all the pins, the number, the color of the wire, where it goes. Once I received my wiring harness back, there were 7 wires that needed to be attached. The 3 in red, the battery, the ignition, which is ignition hot when the key's turned on, and fuel pump are the 3 that you really need to make the engine run. It'll run without all these other things being attached, but for functionality, to make everything work and to drive on the street, you would want it all. But the battery, the ignition, and the fuel pump are the 3 ones that we'll look at first to attach, and I'll show you exactly where I put those. So let's go over to the truck. All right, this is just an underhood shot of the truck, showing how it's laid out. Everything is pretty much in its original position, with the exception of a couple of small things that had to be altered. I mounted my PCM right here in the front driver's side of the truck. Charcoal canister is still down there. It's just down a little lower. It was repositioned so that I could put the computer right here. The reason I did that was because of the length of wiring that was in my harness. If I had it to do over, I might do things a bit differently. But anyway, all right. You can see coming off the computer here, there's a red wire and a pink wire, and there's the gray wire down in there. See if you can see that a little better. Here's the gray wire, red and pink. They run into this harness, and I brought them over to the fuse box. The wire on the side, when you pop this cover off, you can see down there where the red wire attaches. Right here. This is where I added a clip onto the end of the red wire, attached it right there, and that is constantly hot. So that's coming directly from the computer for the battery. Then the pink wire for the ignition and the gray wire for the fuel pump. If you pull this fuse box out, there's a bolt over here, and it just unsnaps and pulls out, and you can turn it over. Ignition, well, it shows you on the back side here. This is inside my inside, showing where everything is. The fuel pump relay, and over to the right, there's an ignition A and B. Ignition A has a 40 amp fuse, ignition B has a 50. I just looked at the red wire, or the pink wire I should say, coming off of the 40 amp fuse for ignition A, and tied in my ignition wire there. And then this fuel pump relay, which actually is this one, I tied my gray wire, spliced it in there. And of course I soldered the connections and used marine shrink wrap, so that tubing shrink, so that when you heat it up, it has adhesive inside and seals it, keeps out the moisture, so it works great for under the hood, things like that. So there are your 3 main wires that will get the engine running: your power, your ignition, and your fuel pump. Okay, your next 4 wires, in this case, let's take them one at a time. The TCC, or your brake switch. On a 4L60E electronic transmission, this has to be tied into your brake switch on your brake pedal so that when you depress the brake pedal and your brake lights come on, it also cuts off the power to the electronic torque converter so you don't damage your transmission. So you have to attach the TCC or the brake switch wire somewhere that will have power when the ignition is on, but when you depress the brake pedal, that power is broken. Where I found to do that, and on this particular model it has ABS braking, and here's the module under the hood, there's the PCM. This wiring harness right here, there's a purple wire, and the TCC wire was purple as well. I followed it back and spliced it in there. And I tested it with a test light to make sure that when the ignition was on, it had power, and when you depressed the brake pedal, the power was cut. Now, I tied it in, or spliced it in, I should say, about 8 to 10 inches back within the harness itself, but you could splice it in also in the fuse box because that purple wire runs into that. So that's one place you can put it. Okay, next, the tack wire. This is a better view. This is the 4.3 V6 still sitting in the garage. There's my coil. See right there on the, located on the top passenger side back end of the intake manifold next to the distributor over there. And there are 2 plugs. This plug that came off had a pink and a white wire, and when it went to the harness coming off the truck, there was a spade connector that wasn't being used. I just tied that wire directly into that spade and it worked perfectly. Okay, next is the VSS, or your speedometer wire. That VSS wire, it's hard for me to show you because it's all installed, but on the transmission, on the back of the transmission on the passenger side, there's a 2-wire plug. That's the VSS, and that gets the speed, tells the speed of the transmission, communicates it to the PCM, and then displays it on your dash. The engine harness for the Tahoe had that 2-prong plug, but it doesn't communicate with the dash. So I have to take the existing 2-wire plug that was on my truck, cut the plug off, take those 2 wires and splice them into the 2 wires on the Tahoe plug in order for the signal to get to the dash. So the signal was also going to the computer to let it know let the computer know how fast the engine's going, how fast the vehicle's traveling, but also to send the information to the dashboard so that you could see how fast you're going as well. That's your speedometer. The MIL, or the check engine light, the way to determine where that goes, in some instances they'll have you wire in a completely different light. To use the existing dash light, I removed the bezel around the dash and took the dash cluster out. It was held in by 4 bolts, and there's a clip in the back of that. That clip has a brown wire with a white stripe, and you can find this on your schematic as well. That goes to your MIL. So I tracked the MIL wire out of the firewall, back behind the engine, and that particular wire you don't splice into, you have to cut it. Cut it and then use the MIL wire on your modified harness directly to the wire that comes out of your dash. You don't want information going across to the MIL light from your old computer because it's all screwed up now because things are missing. So you just want information going to that light from the new computer. So cut the wire, splice, solder, shrink wrap, all that stuff. The MIL light to the brown wire with the white stripe, in my case, under the hood, and that makes the dash light work. Now, one of the things I wanted to stress also is before you even get started, make sure that you do not cut, butcher, or damage your existing harness or any of the wiring on your truck, because you may need it. In fact, don't get rid of anything until you've got the new engine in, everything's connected, everything functions the way you want it. Then you can worry about thinning down the harness and getting it to look pretty. The reason for that is some of the wires are spliced upon spliced, and you need all of your ground wires. The gas tank, for example, my gas gauge didn't work at all. It was a simple ground. All I had to do was ground it, boom, gas gauge worked. Volts worked already. That wasn't something I had to worry about. Once the power wire was connected, where I showed you on the fuse box, the wiring was already in place, and it showed my voltage or my battery power on the dash. The oil pressure, I used the sending unit from the 4.3, but I had to have a couple of adapters in order to make it work, since the threads on the LS block on the top, right behind the intake manifold on the top and the back, is threaded and it's metric, whereas the 4.3 is not. So I used a couple of adapters to put that in place, and the wiring for that is in the chassis harness, so it worked immediately. The temperature gauge, or temperature sending unit I should say, originally I used the TAHOE sensor, but the sensor is a 2-wire sensor. The wiring harness, or the engine, the TAHOE wiring harness, has that plug, and it plugged in just fine, and it would work. It tells the computer what your temperature is, but the gauge would not work. What I had to do was to get a 1998 Camaro V8 3-wire temperature sensing unit, and I also bought a 3-wire plug. Those are readily available. I bought the plug online for less than $10. It's a 3-wire plug. Now, one thing that's interesting is I ended up having to buy a couple, for various reasons. The color of the wiring, do not pay attention to that, because I found them in various colors. It matters what position the prong is in. So if on your original harness the wire is blue, and on the new plug it's green, but it's in the correct position, then you'll have to solder those together. But it takes 3 wires, 2 wires that communicate with the PCM, and 1 wire to the gauge. That gauge, your original engine, 0.3, for the temperature sensing unit, there were 2 different wires. There was the temperature sensing unit itself, and then there was a different unit specifically for the gauge. So there's your 3rd wire. So find the wire in your original engine harness that was to that gauge sensor, the little plug that worked for the gauge sensor, and that will be your 3rd wire. Then that was not hard to find. It's in that wiring harness schematic that you just printed out. That made the temperature work properly, not only to the PCM, but the gauge worked as well. The last item to make everything on your dash work properly was the shift indicator lamps. Whenever you shift gears in automatic, a manual transmission, I'm not sure about that. Mine was automatic. Whenever you shift into a gear, there's an orange light directly below what gear you're in. On your transmission, on the driver's side, there's a module, a black module that your shifter is attached to select the gears. Your neutral safety switch is mounted on the top, and it has like 6 or 7 wires to it. Just below it is a 4-wire prong. From the factory, they use some kind of a super glue or something on it when they install it, I guess, to insulate it from the elements. But it's next to impossible to get that plug out without damaging the module or the plug itself. And in my case, I destroyed the module. I had to buy another one, but they're inexpensive. They're about $28 online, and the plugs are available as well for about $10. So I had to get a new one of each of those. I have heard that if you have difficulty getting yours out, if you heat it up with a little heat gun, that it softens that glue and you can get it out. But in my case, there was so much glue on it, and even on the prongs themselves, that once I tried to reinsert it, it simply wouldn't work, so I had to replace everything. Okay, from 95 to approximately either 02 or 03, the 4L60E transmission module that's on the side of the trans has two plugs. One that has, the lower plug has 4 wires, the upper has, I believe, 7, although one's not used. In either 03 or 04, I'm not sure which, they went to a 1 plug harness that contained all the wires. In this case, let's look at the 2 plugs that I have. The 4 wire harness is for the shift indicator lamp. So those 4 wires were originally on my my truck harness. They were cut off. I had to splice them into the 4 wires of the new plug that was on my modified engine harness. Before, my gears would select, but you couldn't see what gear you were in. If you take the 4 wires of your existing harness, splice them into the same 4 wires on your new harness, your shift indicator lamp will work. The last item I wanted to throw in there was cruise control. My truck had cruise control, but the new cable, or the existing cable that attached to the throttle body, would not fit to the throttle body of the LS motor. It was about a foot too short. So from the salvage yard, I pulled the cruise control unit off of the firewall with its cable from a 2000 model Tahoe. It bolted right up in place of my original. The cable is longer and it fits perfect. The plug that plugged into my cruise control unit fits into the 2000 model cruise control unit and functions properly. Now, I've heard that there are some years where that doesn't work as easily as that and you have to cut and splice a couple of wires. But again, if that's your problem and you can't just plug it in and make it work, look at that schematic or find the schematic for the year that you're working with, both cruise control unit and your truck, and find the couple of wires it takes to splice in to make it work. But it can be made to work. Hope you found this video of use. A lot of little tidbits that you won't really find anyplace else, and if you can, you sure won't find them all together. So if you're working on an 88 to 98 Chevy truck and you're putting an LS in it, it's worth it. I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. It was a lot of work, but hey, it's if it was easy, anybody could do it, right? So with all this, with these little details, you can do it as well. Good luck on your project, and please give us a thumbs up and subscribe and all that good stuff. So long.